open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system.
We shall go on to the end. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall never surrender.
Good day, everybody. This is UCY.tv with the Solvinur Event. It's the 21st of February 2015. I'm your host Walter, coming to you from the Netherlands, where it is 4 p.m. It's 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in the United States. What's up, everybody? How you doing? So, this week it's working. Last week we had some trouble. Not on my end, but the sound just didn't seem to be coming on, and apologies for that. But we're going to continue today with Rock and Roses, the most dangerous superstition. This is about the whole idea of authority and government. And we should get some nice pointers here. Gonna do a little bit of repeating, just a couple of sentences to get back into it. So, here we go. The mindset of statists usually starts with a reasonable concern, but ends with an insane solution. The average person who looks out at the world, knowing there are billions of human beings out there, many of whom are stupid or hostile, naturally wants some sort of assurance that he will be protected from all the negligent and malicious things others may do. Right, so I wanted to just read that again. We did a little bit of this. The next paragraph we're going to skip because we also did that, but it's important that I just read this because the next paragraph starts with, to wit, if human beings are so careless, stupid and malicious that they cannot be trusted to do the right thing on their own, how would the situation be improved by taking a subset of those very same careless, stupid and malicious human beings and giving them societal permission to forcibly control all the others? Now that's a very good argument, isn't it? If you are a statist and you believe that we need government for some sort of reason because people are stupid and malicious, well, how does it solve them to take those same people and put them in control? Why would anyone think that rearranging and reorganizing a group of dangerous beasts would make them civilized? The answer hints at the mythological nature of the belief in authority. It is not merely a different arrangement of human beings that authoritarians seek, but the involvement of some superhuman entity with rights that human beings do not have, and with virtues that human beings do not have, which can be used to keep all the untrustworthy humans in line. Yeah, that's Plato's idea. To say that human beings are so flawed that they need to be controlled, a common refrain among statists, implies that something other than human beings need to do the controlling. But no matter how hard you study government, you will find that it is always run entirely by people. Saying that government is necessary because people are untrustworthy is as irrational as saying that if someone is being attacked by a swarm of bees, the solution is to create an authoritarian hierarchy among the bees, assigning some of the bees the duty of preventing the other bees from doing harm. However dangerous the bees may be, such a solution is ridiculous. Yes, it is. What the believers really want out of government is a huge, unstoppable power that will be used for good. But there is no magic trick, political or otherwise, capable of guaranteeing that justice will occur, that the good guys will win, or that the innocent will be protected and cared for. The giant, superhuman, magical savior that statists insist is needed to save humanity from itself does not exist. On this planet, at least, human beings are at the top. There is nothing above them to control them and make them behave properly. And hallucinating such a superhuman entity does not make it real, nor does it help the situation. Alright, next heading is the religion of government. Government is neither a scientific concept nor a rational sociological construct, nor is it a logical, practical method of human organization and cooperation. The belief in government is not based on reason, it is based on faith. In truth, the belief in government is a religion made up of a set of dogmatic teachings, irrational doctrines, which fly in the face of both evidence and logic, and which are methodically memorized and repeated by the faithful. Like other religions, the gospel of government describes a superhuman, supernatural entity above mere mortals, which issues commandments to the peasantry, for whom unquestioning obedience is a moral imperative. Disobeying to the commands, brackets open, breaking the law, brackets close, is viewed as a sin, and the faithful delight in the punishment of the infidels and sinners, who are called criminals, while at the same time taking great pride in their own loyalty and humble subservience to their God as law-abiding taxpayers. And while the mortals may humbly beg their Lord for favors and for permission to do certain things, it is considered blasphemous and outrageous for one of the lowly peasants to imagine himself to be fit to decide which of the government's, God's, laws he should follow and which it is okay for him to ignore. Their mantra is, you can work to try to change the law, but as long as it is the law, we all have to follow it. Yeah, reminds me of Animal Farm. The religious nature of the belief in authority is put on display for all to see whenever people solemnly stand with their hands upon their hearts and religiously proclaim their undying faith and loyalty to a flag and a government, the Republic. Yeah. It rarely occurs to those who recite the Pledge of Allegiance while feeling deep pride that what they are actually doing is swearing allegiance to a system of subjugation and authoritarian control. In short, they are promising to do as they are told and behave as loyal subjects to their masters. Aside from patently inaccurate phrase at the end about liberty and justice for all, the entire pledge is about subservience to the government, which claims to represent the collective. Yeah. It's you'll probably repeat this as we continue this PDF, but it says here, who claims to represent the collective. Now, normally, if you represent somebody, that doesn't mean you're allowed to do things that the one you are representing is not allowed to do. You understand? As if that, in itself, is some great and noble goal. The pledge and the mentality and emotions it is intended to stir up would apply equally well to any tyrannical regime in history. It's a promise to be obedient and easily controlled, to subordinate oneself to the Republic, rather than a promise to do the right thing. Many other patriot rituals and songs, as well as the overtly religious reverence given to two pieces of parchment, the Declaration of Independence and the US Constitution, also demonstrate that people do not merely view government as a practical necessity, they view it as a god to be praised and worshipped, honored and obeyed. The main factor distinguishing the belief in government from other religions today is that people actually believe in the God called government. The other gods people claim to believe in and the churches they attend are now, by comparison, little more than empty rituals and half-heartedly parroted superstitions. When it comes to their everyday lives, the God that people actually pray to save them from misfortune, to smite their enemies and to shower them with blessings is government. It is government whose commandments the people most often respect and obey. Whenever a conflict arises between government and the teachings of the lesser gods, such as pay your fair share, taxation versus thou shalt not steal, right? Or duty to country, that's military service, versus thou shalt not murder, right? The commands of government supersede all the teachings of the other religions. Yeah, very well pointed out. Politicians, the high priests of the church of the government, the mouthpieces and representatives of governments, who deliver the sacred law from on high, even openly declare that it is permissible for people to practice whatever religion they wish, as long as they do not run afoul on the supreme religion by disobeying the law, meaning the dictates of the God called government. Perhaps most telling is that if you suggest to the average person that maybe God does not exist, he will likely respond with less emotion and hostility than if you bring up the idea of life without government. This indicates which religion people are more deeply emotionally attached to, and which religion they actually believe in more firmly. Yeah, another very good point. In fact, they believe so deeply in government that they do not even recognize it as being a belief at all. The reason so many people respond to the idea of a stateless society, brackets open, anarchy, brackets close, with insults, apocalyptic predictions and emotional tantrums rather than with calm reasoning, is because their belief in government is not a result of careful, rational consideration of evidence and logic. It is, in every way, a religious faith, believed only because of prolonged indoctrination. And there is almost nothing which state worshippers find more existentially terrifying than contemplating the possibility that government, their savior and protector, teacher and master, does not actually exist and never did. Many political rituals have overtly religious overtones to them. The grandiose cathedral-like buildings, the pomp and circumstance at inaugurations and other government ceremonies, the traditional costumes and age-old rituals, the way the members of the ruling class are treated and described as, example given, honorable, all give proceedings an air of holiness and reverence, far more indicative of religious rites than of a practical means of collective organization. It might be nice to have some morally superior, all-powerful deity to protect the innocent and to prevent injustice. And that is what statists hope government will be. A wise, unbiased, all-knowing and all-powerful final decider that will override and supersede the flawed, short-sighted and selfish whims of man, unerringly dispensing justice and fairness. However, there is no such thing, and can be no such thing, and there are many reasons why it is utterly foolish to look to government as a solution to human imperfection. For example, what almost every statist wants is for government to enforce objective rules of civilized behavior. More specifically, each individual wants his own perception of justice and morality to be enforced by authority, while failing to realize that the moment there is an authority, it is no longer up to the individual to decide what counts as moral or just. The authority will claim the right to do that for him. It's a kind of doublethink. And so, over and over again, believers in authority have tried to create an all-powerful force for good by anointing some people as rulers, only to quickly learn that once the master is on the throne, he does not care what his slaves were hoping he would do with the power they gave him. Yeah. And this has happened to all kinds of statists, with very different beliefs and agendas. Socialists assert that government is needed to fairly redistribute wealth. Objectivists assert that government is needed to protect individual rights. Oh, do they? Okay. Constitutionalists assert that a government is needed to carry out those tasks listed in the Constitution. Believers in democracy assert that government is needed to carry out the will of the majority. Many Christians assert that government is needed to enforce God's laws. And so on. And in every case the people end up disappointed, because the authority always changes the plan in order to serve the interest of the people in power. Yeah. Once a set of rulers are in charge, what the masses had intended for them to do with their power does not matter. This fact has been demonstrated by every government in history. Once the people create a master, Thai people, by definition, are no longer in charge. The people, I should read. Although people are Thai also, right? So, once the people create a master, the people, by definition, are no longer in charge. To accept otherwise, even without all of the historical examples is absurd. To expert the master, that's probably to expect the master to serve the slave, to expect power to be used solely for the benefit of the one being controlled, not the one in control, is ridiculous. What makes it even more insane is that statists claim that appointing rulers is the only way to overcome the imperfections and untrustworthiness of man. Yes, of course, it's ridiculous. Talked about the subset a couple of minutes ago, remember? Statists look out at a world full of strangers who have questionable motives and dubious morality, and they are afraid of what some of those people might do. That, in and of itself, is a perfectly reasonable concern. But then, as protection against what some of those people might do, the statists advocate giving some of those same people of questionable virtue and a huge amount of power and societal permission to rule over everyone else, in the vain hope that by some miracle those people will happen to decide to use their newfound power only for good. In other words, the statists look at his fellow men and think, I do not trust you to be my neighbor, but I do trust you to be my master. Yeah. Bizarrely, almost every statist admits that politicians are more dishonest, corrupt, conniving and selfish than most people, but still insist that civilization can exist only if those particularly untrustworthy people are given both the power and the right to forcibly control everyone else. Believers in government truly believe that the only thing that can keep them safe from the flaws of human nature is to take some of those flawed humans, some of the most flawed, in fact, and appoint them as gods, with the right to dominate all of mankind, in the absurd hope that, if given such tremendous power, such people will use it only for good. And the fact that that has never happened in the history of the world does not stop statists from insisting that it needs to happen to ensure peaceful civilization. Author's personal note. I say all this as a former devout statist, who for most of my life not only accepted the self-contradictions, those are like doublethink, some of them, and delusional realizations underlying the myth of government, but vehemently spread the mythology myself. I did not escape my own authoritarian indoctrination quickly or comfortably, but let go of the superstition slowly and reluctantly, with much intellectual kicking and screaming along the way. I mention this only so that it may be understood that when I refer to the belief in authority as utterly irrational and insane, I am attacking my own prior belief as much as anyone else's. Another way to look at it is that statists worry that different people have different beliefs, different viewpoints, different standards of morality. They express concerns such as, what if there is no government and someone thinks it's okay to kill me and steal my stuff? Yes, if there are conflicting views, as there always have been and always will be, they can lead to conflict. The authoritarian solution is that instead of everyone deciding for himself what is right and what he should do, there should be a central authority that will make one set of rules that will be enforced on everyone. Statists obviously hope that the authority will issue and enforce the right rulers, but they never explain how or why this would happen. Since the edicts of the government are written by mere human beings, usually exceptionally power-hungry, corrupt human beings, why should anyone expect their rules to be better than the rules each individual would choose for himself? Yeah, and another thing, you will probably get into this also, the last part of the sentence, right? To be better than the rules each individual would choose for himself. So, if you, choose these rules for yourself, right? Why would you vote on somebody else to tell you that you need to abide by those rules? That doesn't make any sense, does it? You've already chosen those rules for yourself, you see? The belief in government does not make everyone agree. It only creates an opportunity to drastically escalate personal disagreements into large-scale wars and mass oppression. Nor does having an authority settling a dispute do anything to guarantee the right side wins. Yet statists talk as if government will be fair, reasonable, and rational in situations where individuals would not be. Again, this demonstrates that believers in government imagine authority to have superhuman virtues that should be trusted above the virtues of mere mortals. History shows otherwise. A twisted sense of morality in one person, or a few, can result in the murder of one person or even dozens. But that same twisted sense of morality in just a few people, when they get hold of the machine called government, can result in the murder of millions. The statist wants his idea of the good rules forced on everyone by a central authority, but has no way to make that happen and no reason to expect that it will. In their search for an all-powerful good guy to save the day, statists always end up creating all-powerful bad guys. Over and over again, they build giant, unstoppable government monsters in the hope that they will defend the innocent, only to find that the monsters become a far greater threat to the innocent than the threats they were created to protect against. Ironically, what statists actually advocate in their attempts to guarantee justice for all is the legitimization of evil. The truth is that all the belief in authority ever does, and all it ever can do, is to introduce more immoral violence into society. This is not an unfortunate coincidence or the side effect of a basically good idea. It is a truism based upon the nature of the belief in authority, and this is easy to logically prove. The next heading is authority equals immoral violence. Although everyone agrees that sometimes physical force is justified and sometimes it is not. Though there is a large debatable gray area, it is generally accepted that aggressive force, the initiation of violence against another person, is unjustified and immoral. Yeah. Note the word initiation there. This would include theft, assault and murder, as well as more indirect forms of aggression, such as vandalism and fraud. On the other hand, using force in defense of the innocent is widely accepted and justified and moral, even noble. The legitimacy of such force is determined by the situation it is used in, not by who is using it. To simplify, the types of force, which anyone has the right to use can be termed good force, and any acts of force which normal people do not have the right to commit can be termed bad force. The reader can apply his own standards, and the logic here will still apply. However, agents of authority are imagined to have the right to use force not only in situations where anyone would have such a right, but in other situations as well. It stands to reason that if everyone has a right to use inherently justified good force, and the law authorizes agents of government to use force in other situations as well, then law is the attempt to legitimize bad force. In short, authority is permission to commit evil, to do things that would be recognized as immoral and unjustified if anyone else did them. Yeah. Obviously, neither the enthusiastic voter who proudly posts a campaign sign in his yard, nor the well-intended citizen who runs for office, understands this fact. If they did, they would understand that democracy is nothing more than majority-approved immoral violence, and cannot possibly fix society or be a tool for freedom or justice. Despite the mythology which claims that a person's vote is his voice, and that the right to vote is what makes people free, the truth is that all democracy does is legitimize aggression and unjustified violence. The logic of this is so simple and obvious that an enormous amount of propaganda is needed in order to train people to not see it. If everyone has the right to use inherently righteous force, and government agents are allowed to use force in other situations as well, then by its very nature, what government adds to society is immoral violence. Yeah. He explains it very well, doesn't he? The problem is that the people are taught that when violence has been made legal and is committed by authority, it changes from immoral violence into righteous law enforcement. The fundamental premise upon which all government rests is the idea that what would be morally wrong for the average person to do can be morally right when done by agents of authority, implying that the standards of moral behavior which apply to human beings do not apply to agents of government. Again, hinting that the thing called government is superhuman. Inherently righteous force, which most people generally agree is limited to defensive force, does not require any law or special authority to make it valid. The only thing that law and government are needed for is to attempt to legitimize immoral force, and that is exactly what government adds, and the only thing it adds to society, more inherently unjust violence. No one who understands this simple truth would ever claim that government is essential to human civilization. Alright guys, sip coffee. Roll me a ciggy. Yep. The notion that man-made law can negate the usual rules of civilized behavior has some fairly terrifying ramifications. If government is not limited by basic human morality, which the very concept of authority implies, by what standard of principles would government action be limited at all? If 30% taxation is valid, why would 100% taxation not be valid? If legal theft is legitimate and just, why couldn't legalized torture and murder be legitimate and just? If some collective need requires society to have an institution that has an exemption from morality, why would there be any limits on what it can do? If exterminating an entire race or outlawing a religion or forcibly enslaving millions is deemed necessary for the common good, by what moral standards could anyone complain once they have accepted the premise of authority? All belief in government rests on the idea that the common good justifies the legal initiation of violence against innocents to one degree or another. And once that premise has been accepted, there is no objective moral standard to limit government behavior. History shows this all too clearly. Almost everyone accepts the myth that human beings are not trustworthy enough or moral enough, not wise enough to exist in peace without a government to keep them in line. Even many who agree that there would be no rulers in an ideal society often opine, O-P-I-N-E? What's that? I've never heard of that word. I guess that's like have the opinion. Even many who agree that there would be no rulers in an ideal society often opine that human beings are not ready for such a society. Such sentiments are based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what authority is and what it adds to society. The idea of a government as a necessary evil, as Patrick Henry describes it, implies that the existence of government imposes restraints upon the violent, aggressive nature of human beings, when in reality it does the exact opposite. The belief in authority legitimizes and legalizes aggression. Regardless of how foolish or wise human beings are, or how malicious or virtuous they might be, to say that human beings are not ready for a stateless society or cannot be trusted to exist without having an authority that they bow to, is to say that peaceful civilization can exist only if there is a huge, powerful machine that introduces an enormous amount of immoral violence into society. Yeah. The same illogical thinking is used by religious people that say, well, if you don't believe in God, you can't have any morality, right? Of course, statists do not recognize the violence as immoral, because to them it is not merely mortals committing the violence, but representatives of the deity known as government. And deities have the right to do things that mortals do not. When described in accurate, literal terms, this nearly universally held belief that it is necessary to introduce immoral violence into society in order to prevent people from committing immoral violence is exposed as the patently absurd myth that it is. But everyone who believes in the myth of government has to believe exactly that. Yeah? They do not believe it as a result of rational thought and logic. They accept it as an article of faith, because it is part of the unquestionable doctrine of the Church of Government. Next heading is called, Who Gave Them the Right? That's a very good one. Yeah. How did we get in this mess to begin with, right? It's unbelievable. There are several ways to demonstrate that the mythology the public is taught about government is self-contradictory and irrational. One of the simplest ways is to ask the question, how does someone acquire the right to rule another? The old superstitions asserted that certain people were specifically ordained by a god or a group of gods to rule over others. Yeah, this is probably where in history, the further back you go, the more this applies. The kings were said to be representatives of God. You know, even today here in the Netherlands, they claim that, right? So he must be good, right? Because he represents God. And therefore he has the authority to rule over others. All right? Continuing. The old superstitions assert that certain people were specifically ordained by a god or group of gods to rule over others. Various legends tell of supernatural events, the Lady of the Lake, the sword in the stone, etc., that determined who would have the right to rule over others. Yeah. The sword in the stone. You all probably know Excalibur, right? The sword in the stone seems like a very Masonic ritual to me. Thankfully, humanity has, for the most part, outgrown those silly superstitions. Unfortunately, they have replaced them by new superstitions that are even less rational. Yeah. At least the old myths attributed to some mysterious higher power the task of appointing certain individuals as rulers over others. Something a deity could at least theoretically do. The new justification for authority, however, claim to accomplish the same amazing feat, but without supernatural assistance. In short, despite all of the complex rituals and convoluted rationalizations, all modern belief in government rests on the notion that mere mortals can, through certain political procedures, bestow upon some people various rights which none of the other people possess to begin with. Yeah, that's kind of strange, right? How does it happen that if you vote for somebody, that gives them more rights than you have? Does that make any sense? The inherent lunacy of such a notion should be obvious. Yeah, indeed. There is no ritual or document through which any group of people can delegate to someone else a right which no one in the group possesses. And that self-evident truth, all by itself, demolishes any possibility of legitimate government. Yeah. So archy, right? Archy, monarchy, right? One ruler. Archy means ruler or to rule, right? An means not, right? Just commenting on some texts in the chat box. The average person believes that government has the right to do numerous things that the average individual does not have the right to do on his own. The obvious question then is, how and from whom did those in government acquire such rights? How, for example, whether you call it theft or taxation, would those in government acquire the right to forcibly take property from those who have earned it. No voter has such a right, so how could voters possibly have given such a right to politicians? Right? All modern statism is based entirely on the assumption that people can delegate rights they don't have. Even the US Constitution pretended to grant to Congress the right to tax and regulate certain things. Through the authors of the Constitution though the authors of the Constitution had no such right themselves, and therefore could not possibly have given such a right to anyone else. Right? So even the Constitution sucks. You see? It's irrational to think that you can give certain powers to other people that you don't have yourself. Because each person has the right to rule himself, as schizophrenic as that idea may be, he can, at least in theory, authorize someone else to rule himself. But a right he does not possess and therefore cannot delegate to anyone else is the right to rule somebody else. Right? So, you don't have the right to steal money from other people, but what do you do then? You vote for a politician who does steal it for you from your neighbor, right? And if government rules only those individuals who had each willingly delegated their right to rule themselves, it would not be government. And the number of people involved does not affect the logic. To claim that a majority can bestow upon someone a right which none of the individuals in that majority possess is just as irrational as claiming that 3 people, none of whom has a car, there is a typo in this PDF. I have to make some sense of what this sentence is supposed to read. Let me see. Money to buy a car. Alright. Is just as irrational as claiming that 3 people, none of whom has a car or money to buy a car, can give a car to somebody else. To put it in the simplest terms, you can't give someone something you don't have. And that simple truth all by itself rules out all government, because if those in government have only those rights possessed by those who elected them, then government loses the one ingredient that makes it government, the right to rule over others. Yeah, do you see how irrational the whole idea of government is? If it has the same rights and powers as everyone else, there is no reason to call it government. If the politicians have no more rights than you have, all of their demands and commands, all of their political rituals, law books, courts, and so on amount to nothing more than the symptoms of a profound delusional psychosis. Nothing they can do, try that again, nothing they do can have any legitimacy any more than if you did the same thing on your own, unless they somehow acquired rights that you do not have. And that is impossible, since no one on earth and no group of people on earth could possibly have given them such superhuman rights. No political ritual can alter morality. No election can make evil act into a good act. If it is bad for you to do something, then it is bad for those in government to do it. And if the same morality that applies to you also applies to those in government, if those in public office have the same rights that you do, and no more, then government ceases to be government. Hold on, guys. If judged by the same standards as other mortals are judged, those wearing the label of government are nothing but a gang of thugs, terrorists, thieves, and murderers, and their actions lack any legitimacy, any validity, any authority. They are nothing but a band of crooks who insist that various documents and rituals have given them the right to be crooks. Sadly, even most of their victims believe them. Alright, that was that heading. That was very clear, right? Next heading is called Altering Morality. The concept of authority depends upon the concepts of right and wrong. Brackets open, morality, brackets close. To wit, having authority does not merely mean having the ability to forcibly control other people, something possessed by countless thugs, thieves, and gangs who are not referred to as an authority. It means having the right to control other people, which implies that those being controlled have a moral obligation to obey. Not just to avoid punishment, but also because such obedience, being law-abiding, is morally good, and disobedience, breaking the law, is morally bad. Thus, for there to be such a thing as authority, there must be such a thing as right and wrong. How one defines right and wrong, or what one believes to be the source of morality, does not particularly matter for the purposes of the discussion. Use your own definitions and the logic will still apply. While the concept of authority requires the existence of right and wrong, it also ruled out entirely, it is also ruled out entirely by the existence of right and wrong. A simple analogy will prove that seemingly odd claim. The laws of mathematics are an objective, unchanging part of reality. If you add 2 apples to 2 apples, you will have 4 apples. Those who study mathematics seek to understand more about reality, to learn about what already is. One who entered the field of math with the stated goal of altering the laws of mathematics would be seen as insane, and rightfully so. Imagine how absurd it would be for some math professor to proclaim, "I hereby decree that henceforth 2 plus 2 shall equal 5. Yet such lunacy is what occurs every time politicians enact legislation. They are not merely observing the world and trying to best determine what is right and what is wrong, something every individual should and must do for himself. No, they are claiming to be altering morality by issuing some new decree. In other words, like the insane math professor who thinks he can, by mere declaration, make 2 plus 2 equal 5, the politicians speak and act as if they are the source of morality, as if they have the power to make up, via legislation, what is right and wrong. As if an act can become bad simply because they declare it to be illegal. Right? Blah, blah. Sorry guys, my shoulder is just killing me. Don't know what that is. It should be going away, but it's been going on for months now. Whether the issue is math, morality, or anything else, there is a huge difference between trying to determine what is true and trying to dictate what is true. The former is useful, the latter is insane. And the latter is what those in government pretend to do every day. In their legislation, the politicians do not merely express how they think people should behave based upon universal standards of morality. There's something wrong with the intonation here. In their legislation, the politicians do not merely express how they think people should behave based upon universal standards of morality. They do not merely do that. And then it continues, anyone has the right to say, I think doing this is a bad thing and doing that thing is good. Right. But no one would call such opinions laws. Right. Instead, the message for the politicians is, we are making that thing bad and making this thing good. Yeah. In short, every legislator suffers from a profoundly delusional God complex, which leads him to believe that via political rituals, he actually has the power, along with his fellow legislators, to change right and wrong by mere decree. Mortals cannot alter morality any more than they can alter the laws of mathematics. Their understanding of something may change, but they cannot by decree change the nature of the universe. Yeah, this reminds me of some of the talks we had about truth and reality and existence. You know how I always claim that it cannot change, right? Your understanding of some things may change, but truth will be truth, whether it is now or 2,000 years ago, right? Reality stays what it is. That is what is true. Let's see. Reality is what it is. Real, the word real is in there. The same goes for truth. Truth has to do with that which is, right? Things that are not true, are not existing, are not a part of reality. It is not true. You see? Nor would anyone sane attempt to change the laws of mathematics or the nature of the universe. And the nature of the universe is what it is. That's reality. And you can't change that. You can only change your views about it. Yet that is what every new law passed by politicians pretends to be. Yeah, right. They make up some rules, and therefore reality has changed. No, it doesn't work like that. You can't influence reality like that. That's what's called living in illusion. A change in what constitutes moral behavior. And as idiotic as that notion is, it is a necessary element to the belief in government. The idea that the masses are morally obligated to obey the lawmakers. That disobeying, breaking the law, is morally wrong. Not because the politicians' commands happen to match the objective rules of morality, but because their commands dictate and determine what is moral and what is not. Understanding this simple fact that mere mortals cannot make good into evil or evil into good, all by itself makes the myth of government disintegrate. Anyone who fully understands that one simple truth cannot continue to believe in government, because if the politicians lack such a supernatural power, their commands carry no inherent legitimacy, and they cease to be authority. Unless good is whatever the politicians say it is, unless right and wrong actually come from the whims of the politician gods, then no one can have any moral obligation to respect or obey the commands of the politicians, and their laws become utterly invalid and irrelevant. In short, if there is such a thing as right and wrong at all, however you wish to define those terms, then the laws of government are always illegitimate and worthless. Every person is, by definition, morally obligated to do what he feels is right. If a law tells him to do otherwise, that law is inherently illegitimate and should be disobeyed. And if a law happens to coincide with what is right, the law is simply irrelevant. Right? The reason, for example, to refrain from committing murder is because murder is inherently wrong. Whether or not some politician enacted legislation declaring murder to be wrong, whether or not they outlawed it, has no effect whatsoever on the morality of the act. Legislation, no matter what it says, is never the reason that something is good or bad. As a result, even laws prohibiting evil acts such as assault, murder and theft are illegitimate. While people should not commit such acts, it is because the acts themselves are intrinsically evil, not because man-made laws say that they are wrong. And if there is no obligation to obey the laws of the politicians, then by definition they have no authority. Alright, yeah, let me let my cigarette. Yeah, Lady Pitbull says, the term sovereign citizen has become a catch-all term for those who assert their rights and refuse to accept what they see as unjust or immoral orders from police officers and other authorities. Yeah, and they call those people extremists. Yeah. Returning to the math professor analogy, if the professor authoritatively declared that, by his mere decree, he was going to make 2 + 2 = 5, any sane individual would view that decree as incorrect and delusional. If on the other hand the professor declared that he was going to make 2 + 2 = 4, such a declaration would still be silly and pointless, even though 2 + 2 does equal 4. The professor's declaration is not the reason it equals 4. Either way, the professor's declaration would and should have no effect on people's ability to add 2 and 2. And so it is with the laws of politicians. Whether or not they actually coincide with objective right and wrong, they never have authority, because they are never the source of right and wrong. They never create an obligation for anyone to behave a certain way, and so should have no bearing on what any individual judges to be moral or immoral. Consider the examples of narcotic laws. To believe that it is bad to use violence against someone for having a beer, which is legal, but good for law enforcers to use violence against someone smoking pot, because it is illegal, logically implies that politicians actually have the ability to alter morality, to take two essentially identical behaviors and make one into an immoral act that even justifies violent retribution. Moreover, if one accepts the legitimacy of laws, politician commands, one must also accept that drinking alcohol was perfectly moral one day, but was immoral the next day, the day prohibition was enacted. Then, not many years later, it was immoral one day, the moral the next day, the day prohibition was repealed. Even the gods of most religions do not claim the power to constantly amend and revise their commandments, to regularly change what is right and wrong. Only politicians claim such a power. Every act of legislation involves such lunacy, the notion that one day an act could be perfectly permissible and the very next day, the day it was outlawed, it would be immoral. Right? Next heading is called the unavoidability of judging. Nearly everyone is taught that respect for the law is paramount to civilization, and that the good people are those who play by the rules, meaning they comply with the commands issued by government. But in reality, morality and obedience are often direct opposites. Unthinking adherence to any authority constitutes the greatest betrayal to humanity that there could possibly be. As it seeks to discard the free will and individual judgment that makes us human and make us capable of morality. Well, that's odd. I hear a bleep bleep. Strange. Oh no, that's not so strange, because I still have a page open from Tragedy and Hope. Let me put out the sound there. Hold on, guys. Below. Now, come on, let me do this sound. There we go. Off. Nice. TragedyandHope.com, guys. Check it out. It's a good site. Alright, back to the PDF. Start the sentence again. Unthinking adherence to any authority constitutes the greatest betrayal to humanity there could possibly be, as it seeks to discard the free will and individual judgment that make us human and make us capable of morality in favor of blind obedience, which reduces human beings to irresponsible robots. The belief in authority, the idea that the individual ever has an obligation to ignore his own judgment and decision-making process in favor of obeying someone else, is not just a bad idea, it is self-contradictory and absurd. The profound lunacy involved can be summed up as follows. I believe it's good to obey the law. In other words, I judge that I should do as the legislators command. In other words, I judge that rather than making my own decisions about what I should do, I should subjugate myself to the will of those in government. In other words, I judge that it is better for my actions to be dictated by the judgment of people in power instead of by my own personal judgment. In other words, I judge that it is right for me to follow the judgment of others and wrong for me to follow my own judgment. In other words, I judge that I shall not judge. Yeah, exactly. That's a very good one. In any case, in which there is a conflict between a person's own conscience and what the law commands, there are only two options. Either the person ought to follow his own conscience regardless of what the so-called law says, or he is obligated to obey the law, even though that means doing what he personally thinks is wrong, regardless of whether the individual's judgment is flawed or not. It is schizophrenic insanity for a person to believe that it is good for him to do what he believes is bad. Yet that is the basis of the belief in authority. If one understands the fact that every individual is obligated at all times and all places to do whatever he thinks is right, then he cannot have any moral obligation to obey any outside authority. Again, if a law coincides with the individual's judgment, the law is irrelevant. If, on the other hand, the law conflicts with the individual's judgment, then the law must be viewed as illegitimate. Either way, the law has no authority. An obligation to obey an authority is not the same as people voluntarily altering their behavior for the sake of peaceful coexistence. For example, a person may think that he has every right to play music in his own backyard, but may nonetheless choose not to do this at his neighbor's request. Or a person may choose how he dresses, talks and behaves when he visits some other culture, or some setting where his usual behavior might offend others. There are many factors which can impact someone's opinion about what he should or should not do. Recognizing authority as a myth is not all the same as not caring what anyone else thinks. Going along with various customs, standards of behavior and other societal norms for the sake of getting along and avoiding conflicts is often a perfectly rational and useful thing to do. What is not rational is for someone to feel morally obligated. No, not obligated. What is not rational is for someone to feel morally obliged to do something he does not personally judge to be the right thing to do, given the circumstances. To be blunt, the belief in authority serves as a mental crutch for people seeking to escape the responsibility involved with being a thinking human being. It is an attempt to pass off the responsibility for decision-making to someone else, those claiming to be authority. But the attempt to avoid responsibility by just following orders is silly, because it requires the person to choose to do what he was told. Even what appears as blind obedience is still the result of the individual choosing to be obedient. Not choosing anything is not possible, or, as the band Rush puts it in their song Free Will, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. Alright, let's light up that cigarette. The excuse, "I was only following orders," neatly dodges the fact that the person first had to decide that he would obey authority, even if some authority proclaims, "You must obey me," as countless conflicting authorities have claimed. The individual still must choose which one, if any, to believe. The fact that most people give very little thought to such things does not change the fact that they had the option of not obeying, and are therefore completely responsible for their actions. precisely the responsibility they wanted authority to relieve them of. It is impossible not to judge. It is impossible not to make choices. For a person to pretend that someone or something else made his choices for him, that he played no part in the decision and thus bears no responsibility for the outcome, is utterly insane. Yes. Loyal obedience to authority, while painted by many as a great virtue, is really nothing more than a pathetic attempt to escape the responsibility of being human and reduce oneself to an unthinking, amoral, programmable machine. Yep. Everyone, at all times, makes his own choices and is personally responsible for those choices. Even those who hallucinate an authority are still choosing to believe and choosing to obey, and are still responsible for having done so. Authority is merely a delusion whereby people imagine that it is possible to avoid responsibility by merely doing what they were told. Or, to express it in a more personal way, your actions are always determined entirely by your own judgment and your own choices. To try to attribute your behavior to some outside force, such as authority, is cowardly and dishonest. You made the choice and you are responsible. Even if you just stupidly obeyed some self-proclaimed authority, you decided to do that. The claim that there was something outside of yourself making choices for you, the claim that you had no choice, that you had to obey authority, is a cowardly lie. Yeah, very good. There is no short... Erg. Smoke some more. Poof. There is no shortcut to determining truth about morality or anything else. All too often, the basis of people's belief system boils down to this. To know what is true, all I have to do is ask my infallible authority. And I know my authority is always right because it tells me that it is always right. Yeah, talk about appeal to authority, right? Of course, countless competing, contradictory authorities will always exist, and each will declare itself to be the source of truth. It is therefore, this reminds me of something else. Truth in itself, does not depend on anything. It just is, right? It is therefore not merely a good idea for people to judge for themselves what is true and what is not. It is completely unavoidable. Even those who consider it a great virtue to have a belief system, politically, religious or otherwise, based upon faith, fail to realize that only an individual can decide what to have faith in. Whether he wants to admit it or not, he is always the ultimate decider. He always uses his own judgment to decide what to believe and what to do. Yeah. Alright guys, that was the end of part 2. Moving on to part 3. The effects of the superstition. Effects of the myth is the next heading. Throughout the ages, human beings have hung to all sorts of superstitions and false assumptions, many of them relatively harmless. For example, when most people believed the Earth to be flat, that factually incorrect notion had no or little impact on how people lived their daily lives, or how they treated one another. Likewise, if children believe in the tooth fairy, or that storks deliver babies, they are not going to become purveyors of evil as a result of accepting such myths. On the other hand, over the years of false assumptions and myths have posed real dangers to humanity. Other false assumptions and myths. It could be a simple misunderstanding among doctors which led them to try cures that posed a bigger threat to their patients than the maladies. I never heard of that word. M-A-L-A-D-I-E-S. Sounds like a correct word. Never heard of it. It could be a simple misunderstanding among doctors which led them to try cures that posed a bigger threat to their patients than the maladies they were trying to treat. No? Does that sound okay? I don't know. As a more drastic example, some cultures offered up human sacrifices in the hope that doing so would win the favor of their imaginary gods. But nothing else comes close to the level of destruction, mental, emotional and physical, that has occurred throughout the world and throughout recorded history as a result of the belief in authority. By dramatically altering how people perceive the world, the myth of authority alters their thoughts and actions as well. In fact, the belief in the legitimacy of a ruling class, in this case government, leads nearly everyone to either condone or commit acts of evil without even realizing it. Having been convinced that authority is real and that by way of it some human beings have acquired the moral right to initiate violence and commit acts of aggression against others by way of so-called laws, every Democrat, every Republican, every voter and everyone else who advocates government in any form is a proponent of violence and injustice. Of course, they do not see it that way because their belief in authority has warped and perverted their perception of reality. Yeah. That's called living in illusion. The trouble is that when something alters a person's perception of reality, the person rarely notices it happening. For example, the world might look very different to someone wearing colored contact lenses, even though he cannot see the lenses themselves. The same is true of mental lenses. Each person thinks that the world is really the way he sees it. Everyone can point to others and claim that they are out of touch with reality, but almost no one thinks that his own perception is skewed, even when others tell him so. The result is billions of people pointing fingers at each other, telling each other how delusional and misguided they are, with almost none of them willing or even able to honestly examine the lenses that distort his own perception. Everything a person has been exposed to, especially when young, has an impact on how he views the world. What his parents taught him, what he learned in school, how he has seen people behaving, the culture he grew up in, the religion he was raised in, all create a long-lasting set of mental lenses that affect how he sees the world. There are countless examples of how mere differences in perspective have led to horrendous consequences. A suicide bomber who intentionally kills dozens of civilian strangers imagines that he's doing the right thing. Nearly everyone on both sides of every war imagines himself to be in the right. No one imagines himself to be the bad guy. Military conflicts are entirely the result of differences in perspective resulting from mental lenses that have been trained into the soldier on both sides. It should be self-evident that if thousands of basically good people were all seeing the world as it is, they would not be desperately trying to kill each other. In most cases, the problem is not actual evil or malice, but simply an inability to see things as they are. Consider, as an analogy, someone who has ingested a strong hallucinogen, and who, as a result, becomes convinced that his best friend is really a malicious alien monster in disguise. From the perspective of the one having hallucinations, violently attacking his friend is perfectly reasonable and justified. The problem in the case of one whose perception of reality has been so distorted is not that he is immoral or that he is stupid or that he is malicious. The problem is that he is not seeing things as they actually are. And as a result, decisions and actions which seem perfectly appropriate to him are, in reality, horribly destructive. And this reminds me of things I've mentioned in the past about acting. I've said in the past that people do not act, right? And why did I say that? It's because, as he points out here very well, I also believe that most people have a skewed view of reality, and therefore their actions have no effect, because what they are doing is meddling in an illusion. Right? There's no reality there, and therefore they cannot act. You understand? It's not real acting what they do. And when such a hallucination is shared by many, the results become far worse. When everyone has the same misperception of reality, when everyone believes something untrue, even something patently absurd, it doesn't feel untrue or absurd to them. When a false or illogical idea is constantly repeated and reinforced by nearly everyone, it rarely occurs to anyone to even begin to question it. In fact, most people become literally incapable of questioning it, because over time it becomes solidified in their minds as a given, an assumption that doesn't need a rational basis and doesn't need to be analyzed or reconsidered, because everyone knows it to be true. In reality, however... Hey Donna, what's up? How you doing? In reality, however, each person simply assumes it to be true, because he cannot imagine that everyone else, including all the respectable, well-known, educated people on the radio and TV, could all believe something false. What business does one average individual having doubting something which everyone else seems perfectly comfortable accepting as indisputable truth? Yeah, I missed one word there. What business does one average individual have doubting something which everyone else seems perfectly comfortable accepting as indisputable truth? Such A deeply entrenched belief is invisible to those who believe it. When a mind has always thought of something in one way, that mind will imagine evidence and hallucinate experiences supporting the idea. 1,000 years ago, people would have confidently proclaimed that it was a proven fact that the earth was flat, and they would have said it with just as much certainty and honesty as we proclaim it to be round. Yeah. It's not exactly like a sphere. Because of the rotation, it's more pear-like shape. Not really like sphere, perfect sphere. To them, the idea of the world being a giant spherical thing floating around in space and attached to nothing was patently ridiculous. Yeah. Attached to nothing? Alright. Maybe it's just my view here, but it's like the sun keeping us in place, spinning around, attached to the sun, I don't know, whatever, doesn't matter. And their utterly false assumption about the world being flat would have seemed to them to be a scientific self-evident fact. Another thing I want to say about that is they were talking about that in Grecian times also. But the Greeks, they knew that the earth was round. Also the old Indians, going even further back than the Greeks, they also thought that the earth was not flat, but rather more of a roundish shape. So it is with the belief in authority and government. To most people, government feels like an obvious reality, as rational and self-evident as gravity. Yeah, that's a problem. You know, we've grown up in this system, and because your parents, your friends, your neighbors, your teachers, your television presentators, you know, they have no problem with government, you know, most of them. They all think it's all right. And so you, because you grow up in this, start accepting it as normal or as reality also. Right? And those ideas are very hard to get rid of. Few people have ever objectively examined the concept because they have never had a reason to. Everyone knows that government is real and necessary and legitimate and unavoidable. Everyone assumes that it is and talks as if it is. Let me try this again. Everyone assumes that it is and talks as if it is, so why would anyone question it? Not only are people rarely given a reason to examine the concept of government, but they have a very compelling psychological incentive to not examine it. Yeah. It is exceedingly uncomfortable and disturbing, even existentially terrifying, for someone to call into question one of the bedrock assumptions upon which his entire view of reality and his entire moral code has been based for all his life. One whose perception and judgment have been distorted by the superstition of authority, and that describes nearly everyone, will not find it easy or pleasant to contemplate the possibility that his entire belief system is based upon a lie, and that much of what he has done throughout his life as a result of believing that lie has been harmful to himself, his friends, and his family, and humanity in general. In short, the belief in authority and government warps the perception of almost every person, skews his judgment, and leads him to say and do things which are often irrational, or pointless, or counterproductive, or hypocritical, or even horribly destructive and heinously evil. Of course, the believers in the myth do not see it that way, because they do not see it as a belief at all. They are firmly convinced that authority is real, and based upon that false assumption, conclude that their resulting perception, thoughts, opinions, and actions are perfectly reasonable, justified, and proper. Just as the Aztecs, remember those people from ancient times, South America, I think, no doubt believed their human sacrifices to be reasonable, justifiable, and proper. A superstition capable of making otherwise decent people view good as evil and evil as good, which is exactly what the belief in authority does, is what poses the real threat to humanity. Yeah. This reminds me of maybe people don't like it when I break the PDF and start talking about what I think, but but it just reminds me of the kind of philosophy that will, if not already has, influenced the new age way of thinking. Alright? I'll type the word into chat so people can actually look it up and see what other things are also meant by this. It's a Sanskrit word, and it's to do with violence and justifiable violence, right? You know, they say, well, religions are also peaceful, right? And so many forms of Hinduism also claim, well, you shouldn't murder and this and that, right? They say because there is this Sanskrit term, they call it ahimsa. I just typed it into chat so people can actually look it up. But himsa means violence. Ahimsa means non-violent, right? But there's a very strange way what they think violence is. They say that violence is disrupting someone's karmic path. That's what they say, right? So if in the war of Kurukshetra, where according to their own mythology, 6 million people died, or 6 billion, which was it? They say, well, no, that's not violence, because it was their karma. You know? They don't see that as immoral, right? So that's doublethink. So be very wary of that. They say, well, violence is only if the path of the soul that the soul is taking is being disrupted. Right? So they would call it violence if you go out on the street and you shoot somebody. Oh, well, yeah, that person had a longer life coming ahead of him. Really? But if you kill 6 billion in a war, that's okay. You know, that because then it was their karma. Right? They say that a soul has a path to go. And if you interrupt that path, that is called violence. So it's all based upon this belief in a soul which cannot be sensed, cannot be smelled, cannot be seen, cannot be heard, cannot be felt. Yeah, you know? It's a pure belief. And then claim violence has something to do with that. Alright, next, moving on. The superstition of authority affects the perceptions and actions of different people in different ways, whether it be the lawmakers who imagine themselves to have the right to rule, the law enforcers who imagine themselves to have the right and obligation to enforce the commands of the lawmakers, the subjects who imagine themselves to have the moral duty to obey, or mere spectators looking on as neutral observers. The effect of the belief in authority on these various groups, when taken together, leads to a degree of oppression, injustice, theft, and murder which simply could not and would not exist otherwise. Wow. Simply could not and would not otherwise exist, it actually says here. Part 3, again, A. The effects of the myth on the masters. Next heading, the divine right of politicians. In this country, at the top of the gang called government are the congressmen, presidents, and judges. In other countries, the rulers are known by other names, such as king, emperors, or members of parliament. And though they are at the top of the authoritarian organization, they are not perceived to be authority itself, the way kings used to be. They are still imagined to be acting on behalf of something other than themselves, some abstract entity called government. As a result of the belief in authority, they are imagined to have rights to do things in the name of government that none of them had the right to do as individuals. Right? That's an important point here. The legitimacy of their actions is not measured by what they do, but by how they do it. In most people's eyes, the actions that politicians take in their official capacity and the commands they issue by law. There's another typo here. How do I read this? Let's see, hold on, guys. Let's see, how do I read this? The actions that politicians take in their official capacity and the commands they issue by law or the accepted I can't make sense of this sentence. Alright, I'll just read it how it is spelled out here, and maybe you guys can make sense of it. In most people's eyes, the actions that politicians take in their official capacity and the commands they issue by lay of the accepted political rituals are judged by a very different standard than are their actions as private individuals. See, that doesn't make any sense. If a congressman breaks into his neighbor's home and takes $1,000, he is seen as a criminal. If, on the other hand, together with his fellow politician, he imposes a tax, demanding the same $1,000 from the same neighbor, it is seen as legitimate. What would have been armed robbery would then be viewed by almost anyone as legitimate taxation. Not only would the congressman not be viewed as a crook, but any tax cheats who resisted his extortionist demands would be considered a criminal. Talk about making it completely the other way around, right? Somebody steals $1,000 from you, and if you say no, you are the criminal. That's ridiculous. Yeah. But the belief in authority not only changes how lawmakers are viewed by the masses, it also changes how lawmakers view themselves. It should be obvious that if a person becomes convinced that he has the moral right to rule over others, that belief will have a significant effect upon his behavior. If he believes that he has the right to demand the portions of everyone's income under threat of punishment, provided he does it through accepted legal procedures, he will almost certainly do so. If he's convinced that he has the right to coercively control the decision of his neighbors, that it is moral and legitimate for him to do so, he almost certainly will. And, at least at first, he may even do so with the best of intentions. A simple mental exercise gives a glimpse into how and why politicians act the way they do. Think about what you would do if you were made king of the world. If you were in charge, how would you improve things? Consider the question carefully before reading on. That's also right. We'll take a little break then. Yeah. When asked what they would do if they were in charge, almost no one answers, I would just leave the people alone. Instead, most people start imagining the ways in which they could use the ability to control people as a tool for good, for the betterment of mankind. If one starts with the assumption that such control can be legitimate and righteous, the possibilities are nearly endless. One could make a healthier country by forcing people to eat more nutritious foods and exercise regularly. One could help the poor by forcing the rich to give them money. One could make people safer by forcing them to pay for a strong system of defense. One could make things more equitable and society more compassionate by forcing people to behave the way that they should. However, while many positive benefits for society can be imagined, if only government power were used for good, the potential for tyranny and oppression, in fact the inevitability of tyranny and oppression, is just as easy to imagine. Once someone believes himself to have the right to control others, there is little likelihood that he will choose not to use that power, and whatever noble intentions he may have had to begin with, he will actually end up doing is using violence and the threat of violence to impose his will upon others. Even seemingly benevolent causes like giving to the poor first require government to forcibly take the wealth from another. Once someone, however virtuous and well-intentioned he may be, has accepted the premise that legal aggression is legitimate, and once he has been given the reins of power, and with them the supposed right to rule, the chances of that person choosing not to forcibly control his neighbors is almost none. The level of coercion and violence he inflicts upon others may vary, but he will become a tyrant to one degree or another, because once someone truly believes that he has the right to rule, even if it is a limited manner, he will not view others or treat others as equals. He will view them and treat them as subjects. And that is if the person started with good intentions. Many who seek high office do it for purely selfish reasons from the start, because they desire wealth and power for themselves and delight in dominating other people. Of course, acquiring a position of authority is, for such people, a means of achieving an enormous amount of power that they would not otherwise have. The examples throughout the world and throughout history of megalomaniacs using the facade of authority to commit heinous atrocities are so common and well known that they hardly require mentioning at all. Putting evil people into positions of authority, like Stalin, Lenin, Mao, Hitler, Mussolini, Pol Pot, have resulted in the robbery, assault, harassment, terrorization, torture, and outright murder of a nearly incomprehensible number of human beings. It is so obvious that it is almost silly to even say it. Giving power to bad people possesses a danger to humanity. Yeah. But giving power to good people, people who at least initially intend to use their power for good, can be just as dangerous. Because for one to believe that he has the right to rule necessarily requires him to believe that he is exempt from basic human morality. Yeah, that's a good point. When someone imagines himself to be a legitimate lawmaker, he will try to use the force of law to control his neighbors and feel no guilt while doing so. Ironically, though lawmakers are at the very top of the authoritarian hierarchy, even they do not accept personal responsibility for what government does. Yeah. I hope he gets into this a bit in the rest of this PDF, which is still a long way to go. But puppets are not at the top of an authoritarian hierarchy, right? Even they speak as if the law is something other than the commands they issue. For example, it is very unlikely that any politician would feel justified hiring armed thugs to invade his neighbor's home and drag his neighbor away and put him in a cage for the supposed sin of smoking marijuana. Yet many politicians have advocated exactly that via anti-drug legislation. They seem to feel no shame or guilt regarding the fact that their legislation has resulted in millions of non-violent people being forcibly taken from their friends and families and made to live in cages for years on end, sometimes for the rest of their lives. When they speak of the acts of violence which they are directly responsible for, and narcotic laws are only one example, legislators use terms such as the law of the land and, as if they themselves are mere spectators and the land or the country or the people were the ones who made such violence occur. Indeed, the politicians' level of psychological detachment from what they have personally and directly caused via their laws border on insanity. They command armies of tax collectors to forcibly confiscate the wealth earned by hundreds of millions of people. They enact one intrusive law after another, using threats of violence to control every aspect of the lives of millions of people they have never met and know nothing about. And after they have been directly responsible for initiating violence on a regular basis against nearly everyone living within hundreds or thousands of miles of them, they are genuinely shocked and offended if one of their victims threatens to use violence against them. They consider it despicable for a mere peasant to even threaten to do what they do. The politicians do to millions of people every day. At the same time, they do not even seem to notice the millions of people who are imprisoned, whose property is stolen, whose financial lives are ruined, whose freedom and dignity are assaulted, who are harassed, attacked, and sometimes murdered by government thugs as a direct result of the very laws those politicians created. When young men and women are dying by the thousands in the latest war game waged by politicians, the politicians speak of it as a sacrifice for freedom, when it is nothing of the sort. The politicians even use scenes of soldiers in caskets, a consequence directly attributable to what those politicians did, as photo ops, to show the public how concerned and compassionate they are. The very people who sent the young folk off to kill or die then speak about what happened as if they themselves were mere observers, saying things like, they died for their country, and there are casualties in every war, as if the war just happened by itself. And of course, the thousands upon thousands of people on the other side, the subjects of some other authority, the citizens of some other country, who are killed in the wars waged by the politicians, are barely even mentioned. They are an occasional statistic reported on the evening news. And never do the politicians accept the smallest shred of responsibility for the widespread, large-scale, prolonged pain and suffering, mental and physical, which their warmongering has inflicted upon thousands and millions of human beings. Again, the depth of their denial and complete evasion of personal responsibility can be seen in the fact that, if one of the victims of the politician's war game decides to attack the source by directly targeting the one who gave the orders to attack, all of the politicians, even those claiming to be against the war, and all of those talking heads on television express shock and outrage that anyone would do something so despicable. Yeah, very good point. This is because, in the eyes of the lawmakers, due to the amazing power of the authority myth to completely warp and distort their perception of reality when they do things which result in the death of thousands of innocents, that is, the unfortunate cost of war. But when one of their victims tries to strike back at the source, it is terrorism. It is bad enough for those who are just obeying orders to deny personal responsibility for their actions, which is addressed below. But for those actually giving the orders and making up the orders, to deny any responsibility for what their orders directly cause to happen is sheer lunacy. Yet, this is what lawmakers always do on every level, whether it is the federal government or some local township or borough council. Every time a legislature imposes a tax on something or imposes some new legal restriction, the politicians are using the threat of violence to control people. But due to their undying faith in the myth of authority, they cannot see that that is what they are doing, and they are never taking responsibility for having threatened and extorted their neighbors. Alright, guys. Thanks everybody in the chat room. Anon 37, Banjoy, Del, Dan, Hopper, Jax, JJ, and Joe Friday. Jules is also there. How you doing, Jules? Lady Pitbull. What's up? Lumper-D, Road Dog, Top Knot, The Greaser, Cap Gringo. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody. It's 17:58, so my outro is going to come in soon. And we had a good full chat today. 20 people, like, full chat, right? No, it's okay, guys, it's okay. I'll be back next week when we continue this. We are only like, one third of the way. And there it goes. This is what Huxley says, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
to create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system.